Angels are undeniably one of Magic the Gathering's most iconic creature types. With a first appearance back in the very first set, they have cemented themselves as the signature creature of white and have had enough variations throughout the game's history and settings to eventually appear in every color. While this does put angels on a similar level to the likes of goblins or elves, what sets angels apart from most any other creature type that's so ubiquitous is the unifying lore that ties every angel, regardless of their home plane, together. This goes back to Richard Garfield's initial intentions when creating Magic's first angel, the simply named Serra angel. There was an overt attempt to avoid the more typically Christian depictions of angels, which typically were masculine if not overtly male in many popular depictions. As such, the idea of angels in Magic draws much more from the idea of the winged Valkyries of Norse mythology. Serra Angel set the standard for what would be the most archetypal depiction of Magic's battle angel with a resolute, beautiful winged woman clad in white holding her blade. Serra Angel costs 3 generic and 2 white mana for a creature with 4 power and toughness, as well as the keyword abilities Flying and Vigilance. Flying made it so only creatures with Flying could reach or block it, and Vigilance made it so Serra did not tap to attack, and thus would be free to block even after getting in for damage. While by modern standards, this is nowhere near constructed playable, at the time this was arguably the best creature in the game. Serra Angel was an instant icon amongst Magic's earliest players as an example of a threat that was relatively efficient to cast and offered offense and defense. Serra Angel became such an icon card in its own right that the first time it was not reprinted in a core set caused genuine backlash from some upset players. And while one can certainly talk at length about the historical relevance of Serra Angel and the way it shaped early control deck construction, the most relevant detail about Serra Angel for our purposes is simply its name. Serra Angel is an angel that was the creation of a character named Serra. The character was originally named for the serrated blade she was intended to carry, however, this detail never actually made it to any final product, and Serra generally is not seen as a warrior. While it would take several decades for Serra the Benevolent to receive a proper card, this was in part due to her strength being too powerful to depict in cards at the time. Serra was a planeswalker, a powerful mage with the ability to travel between the various worlds and realities within the multiverse of Magic the Gathering. While the exact abilities and level of power that comes with being a planeswalker has changed throughout years of story events, there was no time where planeswalkers were more powerful than within the first years of Magic's story. Early planeswalkers were essentially godlike beings, with power beyond the bounds of the current strongest characters in the multiverse. These planeswalkers were seen as so powerful that they couldn't really be fully depicted in-game, with the only examples being planeswalkers before they became planeswalkers, or when they were actively in disguise and pretending to be a weak mortal. Even among these powerful pre-mending planeswalkers, Serra was an ancient being, technically human but powerful and ageless throughout the eternities. Her journeys eventually took her to Dominaria, one of the most important planes in the grand narrative of Magic the Gathering. It was there that she first created angels, of which Serra Angel is a member. These original angels were implied to be constructs imbued with the souls of holy spirits and brave warriors. These angels took on roles as prospectors and vigilant guardians, and as such, the denizens of Dominaria began to worship Serra as a goddess, who gifted the angels to them. The Church of Serra predates most other organized religions on Dominaria, and these ancient angels still persist even into the current day of Magic's story. Dominaria is not the only plane to have deified Serra, with many planes throughout the multiverse having their own form of Serra-oriented angel worship. This is in part because before Serra, there were no angels at all. As such, every plane's angels can draw their lineage in some form from Serra. In many cases, she directly visited the plane and created their angels. However, there remains another greater source for the multiverse's angels. It is important to note that at this time period in Magic's lore, the planes were relatively easier to traverse than they've been for a vast majority of recent Magic lore. Before planeswalkers were nerfed in universe by the mending, they were able to bring others along with them while planeswalking. And some advanced artificers have even invented and reinvented planar portal technology to send entire people groups and armies to other planes. Recent storylines have revisited the idea of interplanar mingling on a larger scale, but even this is nothing compared to the general liberty that was afforded planeswalkers at this point in the lore. Not only could Serra move herself about freely, she could easily bring any of her angels to any plane regardless of where they were made, or she could just take anyone who made a request of her anywhere they needed. While most planeswalkers use these powers for mostly self-serving reasons, Serra's primary focus was to protect those in need, even at greater strain and cost to herself. Despite being arguably one of the strongest planeswalkers to ever exist, Serra's powers rarely, if ever, was used for direct conflict and instead used to create and protect. It was this very drive of hers to nurture and protect that led her to create a sanctuary where all could avoid suffering. Using her immense power as a pre-mending planeswalker, Serra created her own plane, which is known simply as Serra's Realm. While Serra's Realm did house humans of unknown origin, it also birthed and housed a vast majority of her angels. It served as a homeworld of both angels and general Serra worship, and was an idyllic plane centered on white mana. The plane's central beliefs and morals were depicted in the Song of All, a massive song consisting of over 1,000 cantos that was said to take days to sing in its entirety. Cantos from this song have appeared in flavor text throughout the years on cards depicting the realms, such as Voice of Reason, and on even more recent cards, such as how the second canto, which illustrates the moment that Serra created the realm itself, was printed on Modern Horizons 2 card, Abiding Grace. This planar safe haven existed for countless ages and instilled Serra's ideals of virtue in its inhabitants, especially the angels. In a way, Serra and her realm served as the very basis for a lot of White's color identity in terms of beliefs and personal expression. In particular, Serra's core virtues that she lived by and thus instilled into her angels were freedom, peace, art, and discourse. Serra believed not just in protection, but nurturing and encouraging people to make use of their liberty. This led to another variety of Serra Angel. While the first angels had been born of pure souls given undying life in an artificial form, and the angels on Serra's realm were sculpted more directly from Serra and her Master of the Mana, this third type of Serra Angel was born directly from prayers from humans in need. These literal guardian angels are created in direct response to the needs of humans, creating new battle angels in most cases, and in some cases vigilant protectors, or even the occasional tactician or mechanic meant to protect valuable equipment or social services. Regardless of which method a Serra Angel was created, they remained as generally a unified force that interacted and worked with in chorus to protect the realms and its inhabitants. Now, while not every white creature is an echo of Serra's belief, most every angel at their core draws their core values either directly from Serra's teachings, or in some cases are subconsciously born from their virtues inherited to them. Sometimes angels could be rather restrictive in pursuit of peace, and other angels may shirk peace in name for true liberty. There was no defined true way white mana manifested. However, Serra Angels represented a distilled version of white mana's potential. And while Serra Angels represented white mana at its purest and most radiant, they did not make them immune to corruption. While almost 70% of all magic angels are mono white, roughly 10% of angels include black in their color identity as well. One of Magic's earliest angels beyond Serra Angel was Fallen Angel, which cost 3 generic and 2 black mana as a reflection of Serra Angel. While Fallen Angel only had 3 power and toughness, thus making it weaker stat-wise than the pure Serra Angel, Fallen Angel allowed you to sacrifice a creature to give it +2 power and +1 toughness. This ability reflected the twisted nature of a Fallen Angel, having turned against the weaker creature it was once sworn to protect. Serra and her angels reject their fallen sisters for how they perverted the ideals the angels stood for. Serra had known of the corrupted power black mana for ages, of course. Given white and black were naturally opposed colors, it was easy for them to interact in unfavorable ways. And while this corruption was dangerous in its own right, it didn't even hold a candle to the eventual threat of corruption that came from the Phyrexians. Phyrexians were half-flesh, half-machine abominations created and experimented upon in pursuit of perfection and completion. Initially, Serra saw no direct conflict or interaction with the Phyrexians at all and kept attending to her denizens of her plane. But after Urza's failed attack on Phyrexia, he sought refuge to heal in Serra's realm, a favor that Serra did not refuse. Urza eventually was healed and left the plane, but his extended visit there had alerted Phyrexia to Serra's realm and its location in the multiverse. The Phyrexians launched an invasion that was rebuffed, but not without permanently tainting the pure white mana of Serra's realm with that at the time purely black mana of Phyrexia. Serra was so concerned by this corruption that she called for a mass exodus of the plane, sending both its denizens and fast swaps of angels out into the multiverse away from the now corrupted realm. Serra left Radiant in charge of the plane, and the remaining denizens and angels who refused to leave their home to try and stave off the influence of Phyrexia that had seeped into the plane. Serra, for her part, receded into the background of history for a while, traveling the planes and eventually finding love in the planeswalker Foros, who never received a card proper. The two settled on the plane of Logrotha and sealed it off from other planeswalkers ever entering to interfere with it again. Eventually, Foros would die in an accident during his research, and this on top of the previous tragedies in Serra's life proved to be too much for her. She fled away from the safety of Logrotha in her grief and was then murdered by an unnamed planeswalker who was aligned with black mana. Serra could have healed her own wounds given her immense power, but the loss of both her plane and her husband made her lose her will to live. As such, the progenitor of angels died from her wounds. Although this would not be the last the multiverse would hear of Serra. In the meantime, Radiant's attempts at staving off the corruption of Serra's realm proved entirely fruitless. Radiant was so steadfast in her attempts at stamping out Phyrexia, she only managed to play into their hands by killing completely innocent people she suspected of Phyrexian influence. Her sanity waned as the corruption spread through the ranks of her angels more, and by the time Urza returned to the plane to try and clean up the mess he made, she was hardly in the mindset to properly negotiate. Eventually, the two went to battle, and Radiant nearly won as she removed the Might Stone and Weak Stone from his head. As for why Urza had 2 stones in his head and why they were so powerful, that is a long story that would probably require its own video to properly unpack. It's complicated. Regardless, Urza did indeed have these rocks in his head, and Radiant nearly killed him by removing them. However, the explosion caused by uniting the two not only destroyed Serra's palace, but vaporized Radiant in the process. From there, Urza rescued as many of the refugees of the plane that he could before compressing the entire plane down to a power stone to power his means of defeating Phyrexia. With Serra dead and her entire plane essentially converted into a battery, this was the end of the creation of any new Serra Angels. These original Serra Angels were indeed ageless and thus persist to this day, but no new ones have been created since. This does not mean the multiverse lacks new angels, however. For as different planes have found different angels on them, various unique variations of angels have come to be with their own forms of propagation and creation. The most notable change after the death of Serra, and eventually the mending, was the lack of ways for angels to actually travel the multiverse. While most species in the multiverse have the potential to be a planeswalker, there are many notable exceptions. One major exception is that any creature that was artificially made cannot have a spark, and thus cannot be a planeswalker unless given one by other means, such as with Karn Liberated. Angels are inherently artificial beings in the multiverse of magic, at least those angels born from the methods first conceived by Serra. As such, there were no angel planeswalkers, and after the mending, no planeswalkers were able to take angels elsewhere. As such, planes were limited in some ways, and many planes in the multiverse had absolutely no angelic influence at all. But there are several planes where angels, Serran or otherwise, are integral to the goings-on of the plane as a whole. Generally speaking, even planes without any direct ties to Serra have angels that function fundamentally the same. No matter the plane, angels are usually born of white mana, almost always female with a few exceptions such as Amonkhet, and are not born of natural means. Many of these planes also see a singular angel take a role of leadership, if not outright being the source of all other angels on the plane. One such example is Asha from the plane of Alara. While not depicted on a card in her own right, Asha is one of the most important characters in this setting's history. Alara is on the plane that was once split into 5 disconnected shards, one of which was the Shard of Bant. Bant was the home of Asha, a powerful archangel who sought to protect the humans of her world. She vanished after banishing Malfegor from Bant, but not before leaving a way for more angels to appear in her stead. Her lingering will and energy have been funneled into the Sigil of the Empty Throne, a shrine that serves both as a memorial in its own right, but also as the plane's new source of angels. Much like the earliest versions of Serra Angels, the Empty Throne rebirthed souls of valorous mortals into holy angels meant to protect others. Another example of an entire plane's population of angels spawning from a single angel is the Angels of Ravnica. Rizaya, Boros Archangel, was the first angel in Ravnica, a construct of white and red mana who founded the original Boros Guild in the earlier days of the plane. She essentially served as a demigod, ageless and powerful enough to serve as a very direct symbol of order for the plane. Of course, Rizaya was one such angel, so she eventually made a generation of clones of herself to further bolster the Boros Legion and give her a host of second-in-command angels that would be obedient to her. These angels have no need to eat or drink, and it's said that the Boros angels are incapable of lying. Both Rizaya and almost the entire first generation of Boros angels were eventually killed in conflicts across the guild, leaving just a singular first-generation angel left in her stead. Feather, the Redeemed, became the guildmaster after Rizaya's passing, and even sired her own second generation of angels herself. Eventually, this second generation of angels would kick Feather out, seeing as how she had been disgraced in the eyes of the Boros Legion despite her efforts of reviving the angel population. Now Aurelia, the war leader, is in charge of the Boros Legion, running it with an iron fist and steadfast sense of justice, even if that sense is somewhat strict. Throughout the years of Ravnica, there have been many angels that grew disillusioned with the ways of the Boros Legion, and have wound up defecting to other guilds such as the Church of Orzhov, or even moving away from the guild system altogether and protecting the guildless. Even though Ravnica began with just a single archangel, this one primordial angel eventually let enough angels existing that multiple factions lay claim to their own angel hosts. Another plane where angels existed since the very dawn of the plane is the gothic horror plane of Innistrad. 4 angelic sisters were born at the beginning of the plane along with their own flights of angels that served each of them. These sisters lead their own groups of angels and respected one another, yet were not fully unified under a single archangel like many other planes were. This was until the planeswalker Soren Markov attempted to balance the power between the monsters and humans of the plane by creating a protector for the humans. This protector was Archangel Avacyn, who served her role as humanity's protector quite well for centuries. An entire religion eventually was built around her, and while the angels of Innistrad sensed there was something unnatural about their new archangel, they respected her resolve and power and followed her regardless. The Church of Avacyn remained the dominant power on the plane up until the Eldrazi apocalypse hid in shadows over Innistrad. Avacyn and her flight were driven mad, turning on the human she once protected, and leading to eventually 2 of the other angelic leaders being overtaken by the Eldrazi as well, fusing into a singular angelic horror. Eventually, Sorin was forced to deal with Avacyn, seeing her as too far gone and undoing her entirely in the process. This left the power balance out of whack in Innistrad for some time, with Avacyn no longer providing the staunch protection and support she once did, and the humans now more at risk than ever. Eventually, the humans would restore the old ways of magic they relied on in pre-Avacyn world, as well as the protection of the remaining angels under the command of Sigarda, a host of heroines. Despite all the differences these angels have had on various planes, one thing that has tied them together so far is their status as artificial constructed beings. On some planes like Kaladesh, this is even more overt with their angels being overtly made by the plane's inventors. However, even this rule has its exceptions, with few planes having truly mortal-born angels. While many of these angels are actually just humans who have been mutated or magically altered to be more angelic, there does exist a plane with authentic angels born to mortal bodies. This is the case for the angels born of the plane of Capenna, who are born not as pure mana constructs but instead in bodies that appear to be human at first glance. These angels often manifest their proper angelic natures later into life and are seen in all colors of mana, although primarily still white. These angels held off a Phyrexian invasion earlier in the plane's history, only to be betrayed by the demons of the plane and imprisoned away and harnessed for their powerful magical essence called Halo. Only one angel remained free, the young Giada, Font of Hope. Eventually she would help her fellow angels, who would later be instrumental in the fight against the new Phyrexian and their invasion of the entire multiverse. While Phyrexia even had its own angels within its ranks, such as Elesh Norn's second-in-command, Atraxa, Grand Unifier, but specifically the angels of Capenna had proven to be quite problematic to the plans of Phyrexia. These angels had used Halo to stave off Phyrexians once before, and were able to use the Halo throughout the connected multiverse to go back the Phyrexians directly on several planes. While this Phyrexian storyline tied most directly to the new angels of New Capenna, it also made sure to tie these angels to the classic Angels of Magic's lore. Giada in the War mentions the interconnected mental link of angels, as well as showing how angels are able to hear the prayers of those praying to them. This is a trait that has been present in angels since the earliest Serra angels, which shows that even these radically different angels are at their core related to the angels first created by Serra. In fact, when the Capenna native planeswalker Elspeth Tyrrell died trying to protect the multiverse in the war, she did not die in the conventional sense. She was instead met with a voice who guided her away from death and towards her destiny to be reborn as an archangel. This voice was a shard of Serra's remaining will and power, a lingering remnant of the planeswalker that existed in the blind eternities. While it's unclear if Elspeth became an angel because of her status as a Capenna, or because of Serra making her into an angel as she did with the other brave warrior souls from the first angels, what is clear is that regardless of the exact reason, Serra was integral in the birth of the Archangel Elspeth. Seeing as how Elspeth was a mortal planeswalker before her ascension, she is the first and, as of now, only true angel planeswalker to ever exist. She proved integral in staving off the Phyrexians as she reconnected with her Capenna peers, finding her new angelic status somewhat strange, yet right at the same time. It's hard to say at this point just how much this ascension has changed Elspeth on a personal level. She has become more distant and more focused on her ideals of justice, yet still seems to be herself at her core. In fact, much like Serra before her, some planes have already taken to worshipping Elspeth as if she were a divine figure, such as her newfound cult of Theros. It's also uncertain what exactly woke up this remnant to Serra, or just how much agency this remnant has now or even going forward. However, the fact that Serra appeared in any form at all is surprising given how she's been dead longer than most living things in the multiverse have been alive. Serra was one of the most important characters in all of Magic the Gathering's lore. Without her, there would be no angels, a creature that has been the premier white top-end creature since the very beginning of the game. More than any other character, she has direct claim over something that spans the entire multiverse, with the various cultures, people, and groups still worshipping her to this day. Even though she's been long dead, she's actively reappeared in the story in major ways recently, creating new angels much like she did in the peak of her power. Serra's story is overall tragic with her losing all that she had valued in life, but even in death, her values and virtues persist throughout the multiverse, with flights of angels all dedicated to serving her beliefs, even if they don't fully recognize where those beliefs came from in the first place. Other creature types such as elves and dragons have reached similar levels of ubiquity across the planes, yet lack the level of narrative cohesion that ties the angels together as a collective type with some form of shared history and lore. Not every angel is directly tied to Serra and her realm, but even those that aren't still owe their existence both in and out of universe to Serra. Her angels were so common in the multiverse that even places without her influence eventually found themselves with angels. And these battle angels proved so popular in the game that they receive active support as a theme to this very day. With the multiverse recovering from the invasion of Omepaths allowing for further travel between planes for even non-planeswalkers, there's no certainty exactly where Magic's story will go. But the one thing that is certain, no matter where the story goes or what plane it finds itself on, there will most likely be angels flying about to protect the weak. And there's a very strong chance that whoever those angels are, they were very well made by a singular planeswalker eons ago. Alright. And that's the video. Are there any characters, planes, or other lore concepts you'd like to see in a video? Or any other topics that you feel would suit this series? If so, go ahead and leave us a comment down below.